I want to take a flight about 30 miles north of Fallon, Nevada. We're going to go up and take a look at the West Humboldt Range. Sometimes we discover something that's right under our feet, something we've seen for decades, but in a sense never really saw because we didn't understand what we were seeing. But right now, I need to focus on a critical phase of flight, getting off the ground. Though this is a safer phase than landing because everything's getting better. You're going faster and getting higher. Whether you're in a light plane or an airliner, the most hazardous phase is landing because everything is getting worse. You're getting slower and lower and with less lift. I came out here to survey a string of Paleoindian caves. But I also became curious about that strange black mountain you see right underneath the wheels ahead there. On other flights where I fly much lower, actually below the ridge line of this mountain, it is just absolutely coal black. Today I need to fly much higher than I usually fly. This is about 5,000 feet off the ground because of the turbulence. The higher you fly, the less turbulence there is. When there are strong winds, it is better to fly on the windward side where you get some lift off of the mountain. If you fly on the leeward side, the other side of this mountain, you can get strong downdrafts that pull you down. This white playa that we're approaching is the Lower Humboldt Sink. It is about 7 miles wide by 10 miles long. It was called Big Meadows by the pioneers in the 1840s through 1860s. Then it was a wetlands that was lushly vegetated and covered with water. Geological maps call this black structure the Jungo Terrane. The Jungo Terrane was originally deep sea sediments from the Triassic to the early Jurassic, from 245 million to 195 million years ago. It was deep sea sediments between an oceanic volcanic arc and the continental shelf, much like Japan. Later it got pushed up by tectonic forces and moved across Nevada to where you see it now. Below we can still see traces of the California Trail. The California Trail was one of the greatest human migrations in history. Something like 300,000 people came across the United States on the California Trail. They would spend several weeks here resting and gathering up grass and water for the trip across the 40-mile desert. It was the last supply stop before heading out across the infamous 40-mile desert. Historians say There is a grave for every mile along this stretch of the trail. They would often put the shallow grave right in the tracks of the trail, so succeeding wagons would pack it down to make it more resistant to predators like coyotes. After that black Jungo formation, we start to see some reddish ground. These are Miocene volcanic features. The Miocene period ran from 34 million years ago to 5 million years ago. Geologists say that Nevada records one of the fiercest volcanic rages in the 4.6 billion year history of Earth. The bare Nevada landscape is an open book that records incredible geologic forces, compression, volcanics, extension, everything, you name it. It has been called Disneyland for geologists. Now we're coming up on the Lovelock Cave, the most famous of the 4 caves in this string of caves. Lovelock Cave was discovered in 1911 by guano miners. After digging through 6 feet of guano, they found incredible archaeological artifacts. One book I have dealing with this said that it was one of the richest archaeological treasures ever found in the West. It started as a mining claim. They removed 50 tons of guano from the cave. 55 graves were discovered. Among all the artifacts found were a pair of sandals that were carbon-14, dated to 10,000 years. Researchers say that the cave was occupied for 4,000 years. It could be 15,000 years, but really who knows? All of these dates on early man in the New World keep getting pushed back. I've even heard back to 30, 35,000 and more years. This road you see right below you is a well-graded gravel road. You can drive out here in a passenger car, unlike the other caves that are definitely 4-wheel drive. The parking area has shade tables and restrooms, and is really quite nice considering how remote it is. The city of Lovelock and Persian County promotes it as a tourist attraction. The bouncing ball marks the 4,000-foot shoreline that's all along here. This shoreline feature is 11,500 years ago, around the end of the Pleistocene epoch, and the beginning of our epoch, the Holocene epoch. The Pleistocene epoch started 2.6 million years ago. During this time, about 20 glaciation events, maximums and minimums, have been recorded. So it's actually very complicated and overlapping and still being worked. See the black formation coming up? More Jungo Terrane. There's quite a bit of it around the state. In the last 20 years, a new hypothesis has appeared concerning the end of the Pleistocene. It's called the Younger Dryas impact event. This was a massive comet that hit the Earth and ended the last glacial maximum in the climate. The impact location has been identified over the northern ice cap over Canada and the northern United States. This time also coincides with the end of the megafauna, the mammoths, the saber-toothed tigers, ground sloths that could reach 15 feet up into the trees, the dire wolf, which was the size of a modern lion. Back in the 1970s, I went out and spent a couple of days at a site where archaeologists were digging up these kind of things, not too far from here to the north. They even found camels and horses. This black section here that's paved, that heads off of the Cave Road, goes over to Derby Road, which actually goes over to the Derby Airfield, the airport here in Lovelock. I've landed there many times. It's an interesting place, an old World War II relic out there. Okay, let's make a turn back, a 180 over the Lovelock Farm District. We're leaving the wild Pleistocene landscape and coming up on the 19th century landscape, where surveyors laid out land exactly north, south, east, west, divided into sections. A section was 1 mile square, 640 acres. You can see some big squares here that are sections. Sections were divided into quarters into 4 pieces, which were 160 acres. The quarters were divided into smaller pieces, into 4 pieces, called a quarter, which was 40 acres. After the Civil War, this was the 40 acres that were given to freed slaves, 40 acres and a mule. 40 acres is a pretty common small farm unit, and it's pretty big when you walk around it and actually try to take care of it. It's a hell of a lot of work. But 40 acres in most places is no longer a viable economic proposition. You really can't make a living with that. It's more of a hobby farm. Lovelock now has 135 farms, and they average 1,800 acres each. Drainage and alkalinity has been a constant problem here. But some crops like alfalfa that are salt tolerant can thrive. The Humboldt River runs on this side, and also a series of drainage canals and projects. It's rather complex. The Humboldt River runs from east to west across most of Nevada, a little over 300 miles. People back east would call this a creek or a brook, not a river. But this poor little river is actually one of the most important rivers in American history, because it allowed migration in the 1840s to 1860s across to the far west, especially California. The other option at that time was taking a sailing ship around South America to get to California, like 3 months. And it was not a cruise ship experience. You had to get through the Tierra del Fuego, one of the roughest, constantly stormy places, a dangerous passage at the tip of Argentina. Now we're approaching the lower Humboldt Valley, the Humboldt Sink. And you can see how the upstream diversion for the farm district has pretty much removed the water that used to be in this section to the south. In real wet years, I have seen a sheet of water across this area that is now white. A couple of minutes ago I mentioned the theory or hypothesis of the Jungo Terrane comet impact event as what ended the Pleistocene epoch. It's a hotly contested theory because it upends a lot of previous geological and archaeological ideas. In the 60s, I was in a geology class where the professor was talking about a new theory that's hotly contested called continental drift, or what we now call plate tectonics. Now, plate tectonics is standard. In fact, it's what explains what we're looking at when we look at the Earth. Earlier geologists kind of had a clue when they looked at the map, when you look at the Atlantic Ocean, how the land fits the New World on this side, particularly Africa. But they didn't have a mechanism to show, to explain what they saw. During the Second World War, a Navy officer who was a sonar expert started putting together maps of the seafloor. And he found the Mid-Atlantic Ridge structure, the mid-oceanic ridges that started to explain the seafloor spreading. So now we have an explanation of how the Jungo Terrane, the deep sea deposits, have ended up way out here in Nevada. In the early 1980s, another hotly contested theory started developing called the KT extinction event of 66 million years ago. This was the end of the dinosaur world. This wild theory was begun by Walter Alvarez and Luis Alvarez. Luis was a physicist who did a lot of World War II work, including instrument landing systems for airports. He was an observer during the second atomic bombing of Nagasaki. He was following in the second B-29. His knowledge of iridium was key to proving the extinction event of 66 million years ago. Luis Alvarez's son, Walter Alvarez, did a lot of work on the ground, particularly in Mexico on the Yucatan Peninsula. Aerial surveys by the petroleum company Petróleos Mexicanos, or Pemex, identified a huge circular area that was the impact site. The circular feature was 300 kilometers, 186 miles for Americans. The Cretaceous Tertiary, or KT, impact event is now accepted science. I expect the Jungo Terrane impact theory for ending the Pleistocene will become accepted science. There's a line I projected from that shoreline feature that was at the end of the Pleistocene, projected across there. When you look at these playas, or any valley between the mountains An interesting fact is that they can go down thousands of feet. They often match the altitude of the mountains that are next to them. And they record eons of precipitates. You know, the heaviest elements will go down to the bottom and the lightest at the top. Right now, one of the light metals, lithium, is a hot item that could well be here. Searles Dry Lake in California has actually produced more wealth than all of the gold found in California. In the 1880s, the Central Pacific Railroad did drilling near here looking for water. The water was not suitable for boilers, but curiously what they did come up with, there were actually fragments of redwood came up in some of the drill samples. Coming up on the Humboldt Dike, you can see on the right the cut done by the Southern Pacific Railroad in 1902. Then right below us is the Humboldt Drain, where the Humboldt waters will drain into the Carson Sink on the other side. The Humboldt Bar is about 200 feet high, and it marks a certain stage of the lake when there were waves crashing in. We can see the California Trail crawling up the side of the dike. We can see that the water starts to meander and form oxbows. So canals have been cut through the area here to channel the water further on down. It's for flood control on the upstream area. Periodically, the Humboldt River can have tremendous floods. In 1983, it flooded out the Lovelock Airport near here. That hazy spot right below the nose wheel is a speck of oil that's got on the lens. Unlike cars, aircraft engines are actually designed to lose oil this way. The pistons rings are looser because aircraft engines have to operate at varying temperatures in a short time. It can be 100 degrees on the ground, but it's 70 up here. We're coming up on the intersection of Highway 95 and the Union Pacific Railroad. In June 2011, there was a horrific crash between an Amtrak doing 78 miles an hour and a gravel truck doing nearly the same. This is a very good crossing with gates and big lights on it, and it was like mid-morning, and it's kind of still unexplained how the truck drove into the train. 6 people were killed. Multiple people were injured. The intersection of I-80 4 miles away and 95 is called Trinity. It's also called the Trinity Triangle due to a lot of weird fatal events in this area, of course starting with the 40-mile trail. Right below you can see all the distinctive previous higher shorelines. These are from previous glacial maxima. There were no glaciers here, but what happened with the northern ice cap changed the weather and diverted the jet stream to the south and caused it to be a lot more rainy, so they call these pluvial lakes. The average mean temperature was 15 degrees Fahrenheit less. Doesn't take much temperature change either up or down to create dramatic climate change. We're coming up on the Humboldt Slough or Canal, the connector between the Humboldt Sink and the Carson Sink on our left. That little dark spot right underneath the wheel was Terrane Depot and Station. Highway 95 is on the left and the railroad is on the right. Terrane was the lowest station on the Southern Pacific's Salt Lake route at 3,884 feet elevation. In steam days, it was an important water stop, especially for emergency water. The water was unusable for steam engines, so they had to haul water all the way from Sparks, Nevada, about 45 miles away to fill the tanks. There's still large ruins, a large cistern and foundations. During the Second World War, it was very busy. There were about 35 trains a day to keep the telegraphers and the other staff busy. Another lonely outpost on the vast American desert.